Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This is our webinar today, and we're really enjoying, we're looking forward to presenting you to this evening. Next slide, please. Thank you. If you need closed captions or subtitles, please click on the CC button, which you can find on the bottom corner of your screen. This will turn on closed captions or subtitles for the speaker's words. You can also change the caption language by selecting Settings, Captions, Subtitles, and choosing the language that you want. Please be aware that this function is not, unfortunately, available on the Teams app for the mobile devices. So, on with the webinar. I'd like to pass you over to Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. My name is Vicky Vince and I am the Centred Inclusion Lead within a school effectiveness team here at Wiltshire Council. We are going to be bringing you an evening of talking all about transitions or moving up in schools. And if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So in this evening, we're going to be focusing on some key transition points. We're going to think about what transition means in general and looking at that transition from early years into primary, thinking about that transition from primary into secondary, and then moving on from secondary into post-16. So we will be discussing what that might look like at each stage, and we'll be joined by different presenters to talk through that. There is an opportunity for Q&A, which we have asked for questions, and we'll be sharing some of those later in the presentation. We'll be able to answer any specific questions in the Q&A, and we'll publish these later on our local offer as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. When we think about transitions, transitions are a normal part of life. And we go through multiple transitions every day, getting out of bed, leaving the house, catching a train. And when these transitions are planned for and supported, then they can be a smooth part of our lives. Occasionally, some transitions may be unexpected. For example, a phone call that you need to deal with at that moment in time. And it's when those transitions aren't well planned for that they can cause anxiety and can need some additional support. We're going to think tonight about how we can support young people to have their transitions to be well managed so that we can avoid that additional stress or overload for your child or young person. It's important throughout all of this to think about how you work with your child's current school as well as their new school, to think about what they are already doing to support your child, to reduce any anxiety and help to make that transition a smooth one. In today's webinar, we will be looking at that transition point through. We will be joined by Emma to talk through that early years to primary. I'll be back to talk about that primary to secondary, and then we'll think about that next step into post-16. Of course, your child will experience many more transitions, perhaps between classes, between year groups, or even those daily transitions from home and school, or between the class and break time. And if your child needs additional support with that, it's important that you speak to your child's class teacher or your school SENCO to understand what could be put in place for your child or young person to support them. Additionally, on your school's website, they will have published their school's SEN information report. And on this, they will include information about how your child will be supported during different transitions. To start us off, I'm going to hand over to Emma to think about what transition might look like from early years into primary. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. If I could have the next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Cook. I'm the Service Manager for Early Years. So lots of you, I'm sure, will have come into contact with my Early Years Inclusion Advisors who might be supporting your children in their early years setting. Could I have the next slide, please? So I wanted to talk about what does transition look like in Wiltshire specifically, because we can look a little bit different to other local authorities. And so I just wanted to make sure you're really aware of the process that we have here. So your child's current nursery, preschool, childminder, whichever provider that they're going to, will create a transition into school record for your child. It will be a very basic report telling the school about what things they do really, really well and perhaps where some of those challenges are for your child and their specific needs. That should be shared with you in advance, so you can also make a comment about what's working really well and what also you need to get support with as well. And then that is sent on to the receiving school for them in advance of your child starting school. So most of our settings are writing them at the moment, and we'll be expecting those to be going out after half term. So most schools, as you will know, will hold transition events. So you'll probably get a list through from your school, like a welcome pack. And in there, there'll be a list of days or half days, hour-long sessions when you can go along to the school and either be with your child, or sometimes your preschool or nursery or childminder might be invited to take those children along as well. And that's where they can go to that setting. They can get used to what the classroom looks like, get used to where they have to go in the morning, where their playground is, and get used to those adults that they're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. But also give those adults in that classroom a really good chance to get to know your child and also ask those questions about what do they like doing, what can we have ready on day one, what is going to help make this really smooth transition for your child. So when we've got a child with additional needs, we would always generally recommend that a transition into school meeting is held. Now that might be called a TISM, and if you hear the word TISM, that's exactly what it means. It's a transition into school meeting, and that will be arranged between your earlier setting, whether that's a nursery, preschool or a childminder, and the school. For some of those, you might also have one of my early years inclusion advisors along to that meeting as well, and you'll go to that as well. So what we'll be doing in that meeting is talking through as a group, what can we do to make sure that we can meet your child's needs from day one? What is it that they need? How do they learn best? What do they like? What are their interests? Make sure that we get off to a really good start in September for your child. And then there's some extra things that might happen because your child's got some additional needs. There are some things that the schools might put in place to really help with that smooth transition if they feel it's necessary. So some of these things, this isn't a list of everything they could do, but these are a list of some of the things that they might do. So they might suggest that your child would really benefit from some extra transition sessions. So a couple more visits to the setting where they can spend that little bit more time getting to know those adults. They might create some photo books for you, or even for the setting, and they can have things like photographs of the classrooms that they will be going into, the toilets, because we know that can be an issue for some children, the playground, so where will they spend their time during their continuous provision when they're playing during their lessons, but also where will they go at their playtime and lunchtime, the adults that they'll meet, not just in the classroom, so who's the head teacher, who will they meet when they go and get their lunch, and who will look after them at that lunchtime, who might they meet in assembly, so all of those other adults that they might meet during the day. Where will they eat lunch? So where are they going to be sat? Again, just to relieve some of that anxiety for some of those children. And where are they going to put their things? Because we want those children to feel like they really belong to that classroom. So where are the pegs going to be? What's their drawer going to look like? And what are those areas that they can keep their things in? Some schools give out items of school uniform for your earlier setting to use in the role play. So again, they can get used to putting jumpers on, taking jumpers off, using school bags and all of those types of things. So again, we're just socialising those children into those types of resources. They might look at some specific strategies or resources that the setting are using, so your earlier setting that are using to support your child. And you might start to see those appearing in your school setting. And they might also do some home visits and also online video calls, because we know for working parents that can be really tricky to organise a home visit. So we do recommend, where possible, to do an online call as well, so possibly both parents can be present for that meeting, or if you can't be there because of your working time, that you're still part of that transition. And we would always strongly recommend that the school goes and visits your child in their earliest setting or multiple settings if they attend more than one. Could I have the next slide, please? So what can you do to help your child get ready for September and going into reception? So it's a really good idea to get into some really good routines with your child. And that could be including practicing your morning school routine. So getting up, because we know over the summer that can slip a little bit. So practice, what does it look like getting up in the morning, getting ready for school, making sure we've got your school bag, your lunchbox ready. If you're going to be taking a lunchbox, your school bag, where's your coat in the morning? How long is that going to take us to get ready in the morning? It could also be that you start to do a walk to school or a drive to school, just again, so we can see how long that's going to take with our children. An easy follow-up bedtime routine, including a story or other calm activity that will help them to get to sleep at an early time. So we get that routine in place, so children are going to bed at a really reasonable hour. And I know that can be really, really tricky where we've got children with additional needs. So we're just trying to start that as early as possible. Talking to your child about their day. Now that could be at a meal time. So again, we want to know what they've been up to all day. So if we start talking to them about what they're doing during the day, they'll hopefully give you some of that information back, and you can really get an insight into what they're doing. And encourage them to remember about what they did and when, so that they're able to tell you what they've been up to at school. Can I have the next slide, please? So I thought about getting some support. So there's loads and loads of stuff out there for you to have a look at as parents that you can access in your own time that will give you some really helpful advice. So we've got our local offer, and I've put the links in here for you. So on the local offer, if you go to the 0 to 5 section, there is a section on transition into primary school. If you click through that, there is a really helpful toolkit on there for you to have a look through. Some really great resources. I've put on there the Starting Primary School BBC Parents Toolkit. Is BBC Bite Size, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute, what that looks like. That's got lots of CBeebies characters on there, some really good short videos about starting school, what children can expect, and some fun things you can do with your children to help them get ready for school. Tiny Happy People. We've just launched a big initiative in Wiltshire about tiny happy people, and again, for some of your children where perhaps they're not working at the same level as other children, there are some great resources on there, some really good activities that you can do with your child to really start getting them ready to go into school. There's a new page called Starting Reception, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute, which again goes through some of those things that you can be doing with your child over the summer to get them ready to go into reception. I've then put some local resources. So we've got the family hubs. So again, I put the link there. They do some great courses coming up to starting school. So it's always worth seeing what they've got on. We've got Altogether Wiltshire. Again, loads of resources on there. If you haven't accessed that website before, lots and lots of activities you can be doing with your child. We've got Family and Community Learning. They do specific courses around transitioning into school and will offer that support for you and your family. I've put on there the ERIC website. So that is a bladder and bowel charity. On there, if you've got a child who perhaps is still struggling with toilet training, there are some really great resources on there for how to support your child to toilet train at home, and some nice social stories, which are little picture book stories that you can talk through your child with, which again will hopefully help give some strategies about toilet training if that's something that you're struggling with. And I've also popped on there the Dingley's Promise training. So that's a national charity that run district specialist centres in other parts of the country. They're doing some great courses, and one of theirs is on transitions. So it is aimed at practitioners in early years settings, but there's some really good advice and strategies on there. And again, it will help you understand what you can expect as your child transitions into primary. Could I have the next slide, please? So I just wanted to pop some pictures on of what some of these websites look like. So here we've got Tiny Happy People. So they do go right the way down to pregnancy, but it does go right the way up to 4 to 5 year olds. So there's lots and lots of activities on there for you. You just click through the relevant age band and you'll be able to see all those videos, those clips and supporting activities that are on there. We've then got the BBC Bite Size, which is specifically aimed around starting primary school. There's lots and lots of resources, and if your children like CBeebies, there'll be lots of their favourite characters on there, which will really help to get them engaged and ready to watch those video clips, and lots for you as well as parents on what you can expect. And can I have the next slide, please? This is a great website. It's just been launched by the Department for Education, and it's called Starting Reception. So I popped on there the picture of the front page, which shows you can either scroll straight down, and that will give you information about lots and lots of different areas that you can work on with your child to get them ready for September. If you click on the other side, which says download as PDF, what that will do is it will give you the other picture that I put on the other side of the screen, and it's almost a bit like a checklist, and you can check off which bits of those that your child can already do, which bits perhaps do we need to work on. But there's also a really strong piece of information there that if your child's got additional needs, don't worry if they can't do all of these things, but it will also help identify perhaps what we need to be working on next if that's appropriate for our children. So that's all of my slides. I just want to say thank you very much, and I'm going to pass on to Vicky.
Thanks, Emma. Lovely to hear. We're now going to think about that next big transition in children and young people's lives, moving from a primary school to a secondary school. If I could have the next slide, please. Now, understandably, your child's day will look very different in secondary because there is a greater focus on building children's independence and preparing for adulthood. In the primary model, children will stay in one class. They will have one or a few very familiar adults. The environment will be very familiar with them, and they won't need to move around the school very often. The secondary model allows children to develop those independence and also to access subject specialists for different lessons. But it does mean that those children need to develop the skills to be able to access that successfully. Some of the things that you need to consider with your child ahead of this big transition is to think about that morning time. What will it look like when they arrive in the morning? How many other children will be using that same entrance? How will they find their tutor room? When you think about linking that in, the secondary school that your child is moving to will very often organise a first day for year 7s where the rest of the school aren't in. So it's important to reflect with your child that that will look slightly different once the rest of the school are in, and that actually that first day allows them to find their way, to make sure they know where they're going. And then once the rest of the school return, that they will be surrounded by additional children wherever they move throughout the school. Also important to talk with your child about the different subjects they will experience, and often these are timetabled over a 2-week period, so will look very different every day. And children will be able to navigate around the school to move about to different departments and to access different lessons, and that might involve moving from completely different blocks depending on what your child's secondary school, how it's set out. So many parents have reported that this can be a great opportunity for children and young people to have a bit of a movement break between each lesson and to have a bit of a chance to reset before they move into their next lesson. So important to reflect on the positiveness of that with your young person. When your child receives their 2-week timetable, that could look quite overwhelming. It could be helpful to cut that timetable up so that they only focus on that one day that they are thinking about, probably the night before, to know what they need to prepare for. That might include, perhaps you have a chalkboard or a whiteboard in your house where you could map out what subjects they have each day. That can particularly help if you star lessons where they need something specific. So for example, if they need to take food technology or if they need a PE kit, having those lessons starred somewhere, or a post-it on the door to remind them of those specific equipment that they will need to take with them. It's important for your child to understand that they will have different teachers for different subjects. And if your child is unsure about this, it could be that having pictures on the timetable can help them to navigate through the day. Some schools organise for a transition book where children can see their staff, see pictures, so that they can familiarise themselves with who they will be meeting with on a daily basis. Worth asking either your primary school or secondary school about any support that's available around that. Less structured times in secondaries can be overwhelming for children, especially in those first few weeks where there's lots of other children around them. Many secondary schools have a separate playground for year 7, so it's important that your child knows where this is and how they can access it. Alongside that, they will also become responsible for carrying their equipment around. In primary, their books and their pens and their pencils are all in the classroom ready and waiting for them. In secondary, they will need to carry those around in a rucksack and will need to make sure that they have the right books and the right equipment for each day. It may be helpful to have a checklist for each day where they remember the things that they need every day, so their pencil case, as well as specific things for perhaps a scientific calculator for maths lessons. Having a checklist can support your child to remember independently and become equipped in organising what they need. In order to help your child prepare for that, it's important that you know how your SENCO in your primary and the teacher that they are working with currently are preparing them for this transition. So I've put some things that you might want to ask your current school about what it is that they are doing. What are they doing in terms of information sharing? What information will they be sharing and how will that be shared? It's important that you feel assured that the secondary school have the relevant information that they need, particularly around your child's additional needs. And so it's worth asking how that will be shared. Will any support plans be shared with them, and what will that look like? When will you be expected to have your first contact to review that support plan? Who would be your best contact? It's important that you find out that information before your young person starts secondary, so that you know you're going into that new term with the right contacts of who to speak to if you have any additional questions. Please may I have the next slide? Thank you. So thinking about that, I've put some suggested activities that you could do with your child, and perhaps over the summer holidays, to think about what it is that they can do to prepare themselves. It's important to find out about the school. You will by the summer have had different visits, you will perhaps have been invited to open evenings, and you will have had some contact with your school. It could be that on your school's website they have some further information. You could look through the website at pictures and think about what that might be for your child and what they can understand from what they see on the website. Also, good opportunity to practice packing your child's bag, ideally the night before, and using that checklist if appropriate. When we go into secondary, children are also responsible for purchasing their own food at lunchtime. It's worth practicing what that might look like, how they might ask for that, and also thinking about the money system that your secondary school uses. Many use thumbprints now to scan, so supporting your child to understand what that will look like and how they will go about linking in, how they will know how much money is left on their account so that they can speak to you if they're running low. But really focusing on that communication that they will need, some key phrases to support them in asking for the food that they will need at lunchtime. Also planning the route to school. It may be that that involves a bus, it may be that is walking, it may be that you're going to drive them, but knowing what that route will look like. Thinking about road safety. How are they going to make sure that they cross the road safely? If they're planning on cycling, do they know which is the best way and how to be sure that they're safe on that route? Navigating around the school can be something that you can practice beforehand, particularly if your school has a map that they can share with you. Talking about different activities that they may do in the different areas and playing different games about how you would get from one block to another can be a great way to familiarise yourself with the school location. Uniform can be a huge consideration, as this can often change quite considerably from primary to secondary, and it's worth having that uniform available for your child to familiarise themselves over the summer, particularly if they have sensory needs, which may mean that they need to find out what works best for them. There are lots of supermarkets now that are offering more sensory friendly school uniforms, so worth looking into that if that is indeed a need for your child. Also being sure that your child knows what to do if they get lost. This can be a source of anxiety for children. So actually having a plan. If you get lost, this is where you're going to go. This is what you're going to say, and talking that through and practicing. And of course, homework. Homework will look slightly different in secondary. How will that homework be shared? How will you as a parent know what that homework looks like? And how will you support your child to be able to access that? It's often that secondary schools will have clubs that they can support, particularly for children with additional needs. So it's worth finding out what is available in your secondary school. Next slide, please. And I've put on this slide some examples of what that transition support might look like. So in the top right, you can see the colour-coded timetable. Now, while that might look like there's a lot of colours on there, all those colours link to different blocks so that the child knows if they have a pink lesson, they are going to the pink area on their map so that they can be really confident in where they're going for each lesson. You can see as well there's a school map there. These are often available on schools' websites, so you can have a look and think about where they go for different lessons. Do they know where it is that they are entering the school and how they get to their tutor room? Also, many schools will offer soft starts if your child needs some additional support in that first few weeks. Could it be that they perhaps have a conversation around coming in through a different entrance? Perhaps they might need to be able to be met by an adult, but it's worth having a talk with your secondary SENCO about what that might look like. Many secondary schools also offer additional transition days, and it's important that your child accesses these so that they can become familiar with their surroundings, know what the staff are like, who to speak to, and what support is available. The example on the bottom right there is an example of a transition book, which is set out in a social story, and it talks through what the process of secondary looks like and can be adapted to be specific for your child's secondary school. Many of these are available free online, and you can speak to your school SENCO to be able to complete that together so that the information in there is accurate. I've also put some examples of visual supports here. This is a visual checklist so that when the young person arrives at secondary school, they know they need to go to their tutor room, sit down at their desk. The first thing they do is check their diary, and then they can talk to a friend so that they've got those steps mapped out in visual if appropriate, and they know what it is that they need to do before they are ready for that tutor time in the morning. And I've put social stories on there. There are loads of social stories available online about what that transition might look like, but also worth speaking to your school, but both your primary and secondary will be able to talk you through what that might look like for your young person. Okay, that's everything from me. So I'm now going to hand over to Justine to think about that next step in transition and post-16.
Thank you, Vicky. Good evening, everybody. I'm Justine Watson. I'm SEND team manager in the SEND and inclusion team. I'm going to take you through transition planning from secondary to post-16 education. So could we move on to the next slide, please? So we're going to be talking about two categories of young people. The first category is those with an education, health and care plan, or EHCP. Or they don't have an EHCP, but they may have a SEND support plan in place, sometimes called a My Support plan. They may have complex or vulnerable needs, or they may be open to social care. So young people with additional needs, either with or without an EHCP. In terms of transition planning from secondary to post-16 education, we start planning for this during year 9. Now, the SEND Code of Practice governs that we start those conversations early because it's about putting those building blocks in place to prepare young people for that big transition at the end of year 11. So in year 9, if a young person's got an EHCP, they will have a formal year 9 EHCP annual review. If they don't have an EHCP, they will have a meeting, but it may be called a Team Around the Child meeting, a Child in Need meeting, a SEND support plan review, and so on. So when we're thinking about what we need to talk to our young people about in year 9, we want to talk to them about their preparation for adulthood, and that's sometimes referred to as PFA. We want to talk to them about what their aspirations are, and we want to think about introducing some outcomes and goals, and these are going to be centred around 4 main areas. So we've got education, training or employment, independent living, being part of your community, and your health. So they're the 4 main PFA areas that we're going to start talking to our young people about. I've put some, on the right hand side, I've put some examples of an outcome or goal for each area. So for example, in the education, training or employment, it might be by the end of year 11, I will have a vocational profile that sets out what I'm good at and what support I will need to get a job in the future. You might have other outcomes in that particular area around work experience, for example. So there's lots of outcomes and goals that can be put in those year 9 meetings to work towards the young person's aspirations. In the independent living arena, we've got an example of an outcome or goal. By the end of year 11, I will have a clearer understanding of key things I need to do to be safe at home, online, and in my personal and learning community. This is obviously something that we need our young people to be very familiar with, especially with the increased use of online activity. So we're thinking about getting those young people ready for their adult life and their next move on to post-16 education. We may have some outcomes or goals in the independent living sector around the support that they might need in order to become independent in their living in the future. In terms of being part of your community, an example of an outcome or goal is by the end of year 11, I will be going out with my friends at least twice a week. For example, going to the gym, going to the cinema, or attending a social club. There might be something in the community preparation for adulthood space around travel training, for example. So does your young person need an outcome or goal in order to prepare them for their post-16 education around their travel training needs? There's an example there of a health outcome. So by the end of year 11, I will be using my healthcare plan to remind me about my medicines, my diet, and my exercise. That might be something that you're heavily supporting your young person with at the moment, but as you're thinking about that move on from the end of year 11 into post-16 education, we want our young people to be moving on to some more independence in those areas if they're able to. Just to say, in terms of the year 9 conversations, you don't have to wait as parents or carers. You don't have to wait until the annual review or the meetings for these conversations to take place. These conversations can be started whenever you feel ready, and certainly in a less formal environment, perhaps than a school meeting, might be where you can get your young person to start talking about and thinking about their aspirations for their future education. If we move on to the next slide, please. This is what we start thinking about in years 10 and 11. So we're thinking about what are the practical things that we need to start getting in place so that our young people can start working towards their outcomes that were set in year 9. So you might be thinking about visiting local colleges, visiting sixth forms, talking to apprenticeship providers, and that's going to be supporting those employment and education and training outcomes. You might be thinking about future living arrangements. Does your young person want to, or are they able to live at home or independently? And what steps need to be taken to equip them with the necessary skills? Now, I should just add at this point that we understand for the vast majority of young people with additional needs, they will continue to live at home for their transition into post-16 education and indeed their young adult life. But it is certainly the case for a very small number of people that perhaps they do have to move on to an alternative living arrangement at 16 or 18. So we have to start thinking about that during years 10 and 11. We might be thinking about looking, drilling deeper in terms of are the young person's aspirations around volunteering or socialising, as I said earlier, about travel training aspirations. So there's lots of things that we can think about in terms of them accessing their local community. Again, in years 10 and 11, we might be thinking about whether our young people can access services, what are known as universal services. So this is services for the vast majority of young people who can access, and they can access lots of support and advice through the universal services. But there may be some specialist services where young people, for example, they may require a social care assessment or service to support them with their future planning and their future goals. But as I say, for the vast majority of young people, it will be thinking about those accessing the services that are universal. In terms of healthcare services, again, the majority of our young people will access universal services, but there may be some specialist services that we need to think about as they move through their post-16 education. Thinking about what is their end goal, that's something we start talking to young people about in years 10 and 11. Do they want to go to college? Do they want to live independently in the future? What is the thinking around their EHCP and whether that's going to continue into their post-16 education, or whether indeed they can access employment, educational training without the need for an EHCP. So it's thinking about what is that end goal for that post-16 arena that they're going to be moving into. I've popped on the bottom of the slide a link to our transitions information on the local offer. There's a whole host of resources in there that you can use to go through, either with just with yourselves or with your young person as well. So I would encourage you to have a look on there, because there's a whole host of information on there, for example, around money advice, educational options, employment, and so on. I'm going to quickly on the next slide talk to you about the Growing Up and Moving On guide for young people. Again, this is available on the local offer. It's a fantastic resource that was co-created with our young people and our schools and settings. So I would really encourage you to have a look if you've got young people moving on from secondary to their post-16 education. It supports young people and families to think about those questions that you need to ask yourselves and your young people. What do we need to think about when we think about your increased independence, and what are we going to think about when we're making plans for the future? Again, the guide focuses on the 4 key areas, the 4 key preparation for adulthood areas that we've already talked about. There's some top tips in there around benefits, money management, socialising, etc. And I've just given you an extract from the Moving On checklist. It's great if you can sit down and start to use that as a working document throughout years 9, 10, 11. Tick things off as and when you achieve them, as and when you receive the information that you need, and so on. But it is a fantastic resource, and it's very, very user friendly. So I would encourage you to have a look at it if you can. And that's me done for this section. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. That was great. Hopefully that's given everybody lots of information. So thank you again to Emma, Vicky and Justine. We're now going to discuss some of the questions that have been sent in advance. And a huge thank you to those of you that have done that. Obviously, if you would like to or have already posed any questions in the chat here, please keep these as brief as you can, so it makes it really easy for us to be able to answer them quickly. We'll try and answer as many as possible in this session today. So we're going to move on to a question and answer session now. And there's a really varied set of questions for us to go through, which hopefully will answer lots of questions that you will all be having. Okay, so I'm going to just start. So I'll pick some questions and then hopefully choose the right person to answer them. So the first question that we had sent in advance was, what support is available for my young person at college? And Justine, I know you've just been talking to us, but you are definitely the most appropriate person to answer this. So would you be able to answer that, please?
Yes, of course. So there is a lot of support that's available at a college, for example, a post-16 educational establishment. They have what's known as ordinarily available provision for all learners. Now, on the local offer website, there is some very detailed information about ordinarily available provision for all learners, OPAL, but I'm very pleased to tell you that we're actually creating a new one specifically for post-16 colleges, and that will be available really soon. But certainly there's a lot of information that can be accessed. There's learning support information. If you've got an EHCP, if a young person has an EHCP, then the provision that's specified in Section F will be put in place at the post-16 educational establishment. If they don't have an EHCP, then the support needs of that young person will be discussed with the college that they're going to attend. So whatever's needed to be put in place will be put in place. I could probably talk a lot about this, Louise, but I hope that's given the basic information that you require for that question.
That's great. Thank you so much, Justine. Really full answer. Okay, I'm going to move on. We've been sent a really, really good question. It's quite long, but encapsulates lots of information, which I know many parents and carers will be really interested in finding the answer to. So, my child has autism with dyslexia and dyscalculia. Dyscalculia, sorry, and struggles with anxiety going into school and has anxiety during school, especially when situations are new. They have a My Support plan, but sadly not an EHCP because at present the school feel they are meeting exceptional criteria and the school can cope with it. What is the best way to support them to transition from primary to secondary? Do I need to try and get an EHCP in place myself with school support where needed? And I know that, you know, from experience, this is a question that really concerns a lot of parents and carers. So a really pertinent one. Thank you to whoever posted that. Vicky, I know you've already talked about this. So would you be able to answer that, please?
Yeah, of course, such a good question. And Justine's just mentioned around our ordinarily available provision for all learners platform, which is available on the local offer. And that support that should be available for all children and young people with SEND is not dependent on an EHCP or a diagnosis of any kind. Now, in Wiltshire, we are needs-led rather than needing that diagnosis. So for anybody listening whose children don't have that diagnosis, actually all of that support should still be available according to what is appropriate for your child's needs. With this in mind, the transition support your child should receive should allow them to transition from primary to secondary, whether they have an EHCP or not. What has worked well in primary, because it sounds for this family that is working well in primary, it's important that that's shared with secondary so that can continue. And what we know is already working well for your child needs to continue in secondary. Now, of course, as part of that, we're working with the school, you will need to think about how you develop that independence at the same time, because that, of course, as I mentioned, those differences in secondary will look slightly more around independence for your child. But your primary school will be able to advise you on how they can support, particularly around additional transition days to support that understanding around where it is that they are going to be, to help reduce that anxiety, to get to know the staff as well. Who can I speak to if I am feeling worried? Where can I go? And knowing that beforehand can help to reduce that anxiety around the new school surroundings. Having photos of the school to be able to talk about, particularly over the summer holidays, can be hugely helpful. And speaking with your primary school about how they are going to prepare your child for that transition will ensure that you are then supporting that at home. Thinking specifically around the dyslexia, it could be that your primary school are supporting that through assistive technology, perhaps, to help access the curriculum, and making sure that any information is shared with your secondary school so that potentially that could continue according to what is appropriate, or that at homework you can use that assistive technology. And there is additional advice on the local offer around assistive technology. Particularly around dyscalculia, it could be that your primary school are using concrete resources, for example, to be able to support understanding of mathematical concepts, and being able to make sure that is shared with secondary so that what is working well in primary is understood and shared with the secondary so that they can continue that support. But all of that should be happening without the need for that EHCP. So I really would encourage this parent to go to their primary school, share their concerns and think about what that transition is going to look like for their child.
Thank you, Vicky. That was a really full answer. Sorry, Vicky, this next question is definitely for you too. So if you don't mind, just popping back on. This question sort of carries on from that. Do we visit school to sort out measures to be put in place before the new year starts? And I know you've just covered some of that, Vicky, but just a little bit of extra information, if possible, around that.
Absolutely, another great question. So hopefully you would have definitely been into your school, whether that's through open mornings, meet the teacher events, depending on what your secondary has in place. But it's important for you to know actually what how are you going to be assured that the school know what your child's needs are? So speaking to your current school SENCO about any meetings they have with the secondary school SENCO could help with that. I'm thinking specifically around transition meetings where they will be discussing what's working well, and what supports and strategies is in place. Knowing that that information is being shared will hopefully reassure you that that support is going to continue. But definitely making sure that if you are feeling anxious about that, or you would like to have a conversation, reach out to the secondary school and ask if you can have that conversation beforehand. But certainly in that first term, making sure you know who to reach out to so that we can continue to reflect on what's working well and if there's anything additional that needs to be put into place.
Thank you, Vicky. That was great. Okay, next question then. Will my young person be able to prepare for the move to college other than attending the open day or evening? Justine, one for you, I think.
Yes, no problem. Thank you, Louise. Absolutely. In some cases, a young person may require what we call an enhanced transition to support them for their move to college. So this can be discussed and arranged, and that would be with the current school and the future school or college, where appropriate during year 11. So, for example, a young person might benefit from additional visits to familiarise themselves with the new environment, but that enhanced transition would be very much based on the young person's individual needs. Thanks, Louise.
Great, thanks, Justine. Okay, next question. My child currently only attends mornings at preschool, and lots of children will be in this position. And I think they will find it difficult to stay all day as they get very tired. Do they have to start full-time straight away? Emma, this is definitely one in your court. Would you like to be able to answer that, please?
Yeah, of course, no problem. And as Louise says, lots and lots of children struggle with this. The same as some children only do 1 or 2 days a week while they're at preschool, and we do have that level of flexibility whilst we're in the early years. So the answer is no, they don't need to start full-time straight away, and it's a really good conversation to have at that transition to school meeting. So if you know that your child only does sort of quite limited hours currently and that they are going to really struggle with that move to that full 9 to 3, have that discussion. But what we want to be doing is have that really strong plan in place for how we're going to start to increase hours, maybe just like staying in the mornings every other day initially, moving to 5 days a week of mornings, to then just staying till after lunch, to then perhaps staying that little bit later in the afternoon, until we've really built that up over time. And that is something that your early years inclusion advisor and your school can work on with you to get that really comfortable plan for making sure that they're really settled and able to cope with the full day. Thanks, Louise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. That's great. Okay, a reasonably unusual one, this one, although one we definitely should be talking about. So a great question for whoever submitted this. Thank you. When would an EHCP cease be discussed? So when an EHCP finishes, and that's not something we talk about hugely in these kind of webinars. So a really interesting question. Thank you. So, sometimes in lots of cases, EHCPs do end. So when would that be discussed? I wondered, Justine, is that something that you would be able to answer for us?
Of course, thank you, Louise. So it's really important to understand that an EHCP coming to an end or being ceased is a time to celebrate achievements. It's an aspiration that a young person's EHCP or making good progress towards their outcomes, and they were the goals that I was talking about earlier on, and they would be moving on to universal and ordinarily available support. The cease process should be discussed at every EHCP annual review meeting, and an EHCP would in most cases cease at the end of the programme at college. So if we're thinking about somebody who goes to college at the start of year 12 and does a 2-year programme, we may be looking at ceasing that EHCP towards the end of the second year at college. In all cases, joint planning would be taking place with all those professionals and the families and carers that are involved with that young person. So it's not done in isolation. It's done with the conversations at those EHCP meetings throughout the post-16 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. That's great. And I know that EHCP ceasing is something that's been talked about more and more, actually. So that's really interesting and definitely something to celebrate for that young person. Okay, moving on then. We are moving house, so moving primary schools, and this is a child who's going in reception currently and then moving to year 1. We're looking for advice on that change of circumstance. So it's kind of a transition after a transition, I guess, if you like. Vicky, would you be able to answer that, please?
Yes, of course. Thinking about transition, we've talked a lot about those big transition points, but of course, if you are moving house, potentially you will have those additional transitions. And if your child has special educational needs or SEN, it's important that information is shared from your child's current school with their new school. Now, depending on where they are at within within that support level, it could be that they have a support plan in school, for example, maybe an individual education plan or IEP. And how is your child's current school planning on transferring that into their new school? And it's worth asking that question about what that will look like. How will that information be shared so that you can be confident that your child's new school has that information in order to continue that process? Because the support that's available through the assess, plan, do and review process should continue from your old school into your child's new school. So you'll want to know, when will be my first meeting to review this, and so that I can think about what's working and what's not working. It depending on the level of need of your child, it's worth making sure that some arrangements are understood before your child starts, particularly if there's support strategies that they know they are really reliant on, or particular elements within the school day that they need to have support with. So making sure that you're having that conversation with your new school and keeping that communication open is going to be the key to making sure that that transition is a success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That was great. So, this is again one for you, Justine. These post-16 questions are really great, actually. Thank you. What are the options available for post-16?
Thank you. I could go into lots of detail here, but I think I'll keep it brief and just say the main options that we do have for post-16 education include local mainstream colleges, sixth forms, specialist colleges, apprenticeships, volunteering. There's such a whole host of information available on the local offer, so I would encourage people to have a look further on there, but they're the main ones available.
Great, thank you so much, Justine. Right, okay, moving on then. So my child does not have a finalised EHCP. Will they still be able to go to their allocated school place? Emma, can I move to you for that? Because obviously that's about moving, starting school, I think, probably.
Absolutely. So essentially, if your child's going into a mainstream school, if that's where you've applied and that's where they've been allocated their place, they can absolutely go in without a finalised EHCP. And what we would do is that transition meeting that we discussed earlier, where we would have your earliest setting, your earliest inclusion advisor and the school getting together to really look at that support that we need to put in place for your child and making sure that's there. That will happen regardless of your EHCP. We would always make sure that provision is there for your child. If your child is looking to go to a resource-based or specialist school, then unfortunately they can't start school until that plan is finalised. So at that point, you will probably have been allocated a mainstream school place, which you can take up and then transition into a different school later on. Or you could look to put your child back into their earliest provision. Now, the caveat with that is that sometimes the settings are full. And so we've got younger children that will be moving through the system. So if your child is planning to stay at preschool, maybe for 1 term, 2 terms next year, you need to have that discussion with your preschool or nursery or childminder as soon as possible to make sure that you've got a space. And it's also really important to note that district specialist centres cannot keep the children once they're supposed to be going into school. So once they reach that chronological age, the district specialist centre should not be keeping those children open. So they would need to go to a mainstream preschool or nursery. But essentially, yeah, if we can get you into a mainstream school, we'll be there to support you with that, with or without the EHCP. Thank you, Eve.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. Right, we're on to our final question, and that's we're keeping ahead of time, so that's really great. So a final one, and this again is post-16, Justine. So I hope you can answer this one, please. Post-16 provision. It doesn't feel like there is the right option for my child as an alternative provision. What other options are there?
Thank you. Gosh, it really depends on obviously the child's situation at that point. We have a fantastic preparation for adulthood service and team of SEND lead workers who talk to our young people about the provision that's available for post-16. Again, as I said earlier, we've got those educational options for example, college or sixth form. If we're thinking about employment, we could be thinking about apprenticeships. If we want to talk about training, we might be thinking about something called building bridges. There's a whole host of information, as I said earlier, on the local offer website. But I think it's more around having those conversations with your school, with your setting, with your young person, and thinking about if you don't feel your young person slots into a particular option, then what is out there? You know, let's think about what the alternatives are. So we are very much focused on having a needs-led conversation at every point that we can.
Great, thank you, Justine. That was great. Okay, everybody. So thank you for that really varied set of questions. Hopefully there's nobody sat there thinking that they've still got questions, but if you have, please do post them in the chat. I know that within the questions and answer bit here, there's been lots of links to other sort of supportive areas that you can see, and or as all the way through here, the local offer pages is where we will be sharing the questions and the answers from today. So please do visit there, and the local offer also has a whole variety of other resources and support for you as parents and carers there. So please do go there to have a look. We'll try to include any questions that we didn't get round to. So if any are posted between now and the end of this webinar, then obviously we will put them there, and then we will answer them for you this evening or in the next sort of few days so that you can access that. Next slide then, please. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us this evening and taking time to share your thoughts, your questions, just taking time out of your day to really think and prepare ready for transition. Such an important time for your children and young people, and the better clued up you are as adults to be able to prepare for them for it, the better prepared they will be. We really look forward to working with you again as we move forward together to make Wiltshire the best place it can be for all our learners. Thank you.